The words on the page didn't make any sense, but my heart understood them long before my mind did. My mother's handwriting, a spidery, elegant script I hadn't seen in years, was as clear as it was cruel. It was a letter tucked inside a tarnished silver locket at the bottom of an old wooden box. The locket was meant for my sister, Chloe, but Chloe was long gone and the box had come to me. Sarah. The letter began, no warmth, no preamble, just my name, a stark black line on brittle yellowed paper. When you read this, I'll be gone and the lies will be all that's left. The boy Leo. He's not Chloe's. He's yours. I reread the line, and again. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked, each second a hammer blow against the sudden roaring silence in my head. Outside, a soft spring rain whispered against the window panes of the house I'd worked my entire life to make a home. A home for him, for Leo, my nephew, my son. The air in my lungs turned to glass. For 18 years, my life had been built on a single sacred truth. I was the woman who had stepped in, the responsible sister, the loving aunt who had raised a boy abandoned by his mother. I had accepted the title, worn it with a quiet, fierce pride. It was the foundation of my identity, and in the space of a heartbeat, my mother's ghost had reached out from the grave and smashed it to pieces. I looked up from the letter, my gaze drifting to the mantelpiece. There he was, a photo of Leo at his junior prom, his smile so wide it crinkled the corners of his eyes. My eyes. Everyone had always said he had my eyes. We'd laughed it off as a family resemblance, a sweet quirk of genetics. But now that simple observation felt like a judgment, a secret that had been screaming in plain sight all along. To understand the earthquake that just split my world in two, you have to understand the life it destroyed. For 18 years, my world wasn't really mine, it was Leo's. It began on a cold November morning when my sister Chloe, a whirlwind of broken promises and desperate charm, showed up on my doorstep. She was rail-thin, her beautiful face hollowed out by the addiction that was eating her alive. In her arms was a bundle of blankets, and peeking out from the top was the tiniest, most perfect face I had ever seen. "Just for a little while, Sarah," she'd whispered, her voice rough with a familiar mix of shame and pleading. "I just need to get on my feet. I promise." I knew her promises were currency with no value, but I looked at the baby, at his clenched fists and the soft, dark tuft of hair on his head, and my heart broke. I took him. Of course I took him. Chloe disappeared into the rainy morning, and a little while turned into a week, then a month, then a year. The phone calls became less frequent, her voice more distant, until one day they stopped altogether. She vanished, leaving nothing behind but a son and a hole in my heart. And so, Leo became my life's purpose. My tiny apartment, once a sanctuary of quiet solitude filled with books and classical music, was soon overrun with the chaotic symphony of a child. The smell of old paper and Earl Grey tea gave way to baby powder and warm milk. My promotions at the city library, where I worked as an archivist, were saved and spent on diapers, then sneakers, then college application fees. My social life dwindled to PTA meetings and weekend soccer games. I didn't mind. Watching Leo grow was a privilege I had never expected. Our little life had a rhythm. We had rituals, pancake Saturdays, where I'd inevitably burn the first one and he'd theatrically declare it a sacrifice to the pancake gods. Friday movie nights, curled up on the old sofa, a bowl of popcorn between us. I taught him how to ride a bike on the same cracked pavement where Chloe and I had once played hopscotch. I held him when he had his first real heartbreak, letting him cry into my shoulder without saying a word, just stroking his hair the way I remembered my grandmother stroking mine. He called me Aunt Sarah, but the word aunt always felt like an ill-fitting coat. The love I felt for him was primal, fiercely protective. It was a mother's love in everything but name. When his friends would ask, he'd explain, "My mom couldn't be here, so my Aunt Sarah stepped up. She's my everything." And the pride that would swell in my chest was so immense, so profound, it would almost bring me to my knees. We were a team, an unconventional two-person family unit that had weathered every storm. He was my anchor, my joy, the very center of my universe. The ex-husband mentioned in my mother's letter, Mark, was a distant memory from that same chaotic period. We had married young, a fiery, impulsive mistake. Our love was a wildfire that burned hot and fast, and was extinguished just as quickly. The fighting started almost immediately, our personalities clashing like tectonic plates. He wanted adventure, risk, a life lived on the edge. I wanted stability, peace, a home. The divorce was bitter and swift, finalized just a few months before Leo was born. I hadn't seen or spoken to Mark in nearly 2 decades. He was a closed chapter, a character from a different book entirely, or so I thought. Now, standing in my quiet living room with that letter shaking in my hand, my mind frantically rewound, searching for a sign, a breadcrumb, anything I might have missed. And it landed a week ago on the day the box arrived. It had started with a phone call from a lawyer I'd never heard of, a man with a dry, rustling voice that sounded like old paper. He informed me with practiced detachment that my mother had passed away. There was no tremor of sympathy in his tone, just legal obligation. I felt a strange, hollow ache, not of grief but of absence. Our relationship had been a barren landscape for decades. My mother, Elizabeth, was a woman carved from ice, obsessed with appearances and bloodlines. She saw Chloe's addiction and out-of-wedlock child as a stain on the family name, a personal failure she could never forgive. She had cut Chloe off, and by extension she had kept me at arm's length for raising the evidence of that shame. A few days after the call, a large, dust-covered wooden chest arrived. It was her final effects. The delivery man grunted as he set it down in the entryway, and for days I walked around it, treating it like an unexploded bomb. Leo, ever practical, had tried to open it. "Come on, Aunt Sarah, maybe there's treasure in there," he joked, his eyes bright with curiosity. "It's just old things, honey," I'd said, steering him away. "Nothing we need." But I was lying. I was afraid. My mother never did anything without a reason, and the thought of her last intentions being locked in that box filled me with a primal dread. For nearly 20 years she had been a ghost in our lives, a disapproving silence on the other end of a phone I never called. What final judgment could she possibly have left for me in there? The week had been a blur of graduation prep. I'd been busy picking up Leo's cap and gown, sending out invitations, and planning the small party I wanted to host for him in the backyard. It was meant to be a celebration of him, of us, of everything we had built together. The box was an unwelcome intrusion from a past I had fought so hard to leave behind. I shoved it into the corner of my study behind a stack of books and tried to forget it, but it whispered to me. In the quiet moments after Leo had gone to bed, I'd find my eyes drawn to the study door. I could almost smell the cloying scent of my mother's lily of the valley perfume, a scent she wore like armor. I could feel her disapproval seeping through the wood. A cold feeling would snake up my spine, a suspicion that there was something in that box I needed to see, but that I wouldn't want to. I told myself it was just old anxieties, the ghosts of a difficult childhood. I was a grown woman, a capable parent. I was done letting her have power over me. Tonight, with Leo's graduation just a day away, a wave of resolve had washed over me. I wanted to purge her from my house, from my life, once and for all. Before Leo's big day, I would deal with the past and close the door on it forever. After he'd gone to bed, I'd poured myself a small glass of wine, the sound of the cork popping unnaturally loud in the quiet house. I dragged the heavy chest into the middle of the living room floor. The hinges creaked in protest as I lifted the lid. Inside, it was a museum of a life I barely recognized. Expensive, barely used porcelain dolls, silk scarves still in their boxes, photo albums filled with stiff, posed pictures of strangers with my mother's smile. It was all cold, impersonal. There was nothing of warmth, nothing of love, just things. And then, at the very bottom, nestled in a bed of faded velvet, was the locket. It was small and silver, tarnished with age. It wasn't my mother's style. It was too simple, too sentimental. I recognized it instantly. It was my grandmother's. My mother had inherited it, and Chloe and I had always argued over who would get it someday. My heart had given a slight, painful twist. Why was it in here? And then I saw the small, folded piece of paper tucked inside its clasp. A note. Oh, a letter. My fingers, suddenly clumsy, fumbled with the delicate hinge. It popped open, and the letter, along with my entire world, fell into my lap. Which brings me back here, to the roaring silence, the ticking clock, and the monstrous words on the page. Asterisk, he's not Chloe's, he's yours. Asterisk, the letter continued, each word a fresh cut. My mother explained it all in her cold, pragmatic prose. It was a transaction, a cover-up, a way to preserve her precious family reputation from the scandal of a divorced daughter having a child out of wedlock. Chloe was already a lost cause, she wrote. Asterisk, her reputation was already in tatters. Giving her the child to claim as her own was a simple solution. She needed money, and I needed the problem to disappear. It was a clean arrangement. You were about to start your life over, and a baby would have ruined you. I was protecting you, Sarah. I was protecting the family name. Protecting me? My stomach churned. This wasn't protection. This was a theft. She hadn't just stolen my son. She had stolen my identity. She had stolen 18 years of truth. The wine glass slipped from my numb fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor, but I didn't even flinch. All I could see was Mark's face, a fuzzy 19-year-old memory. Our last fight, the bitter words, the tearful, messy, regrettable night of reconciliation that followed, just before the final papers were signed. A single night, A night I had forced myself to forget. A night that, I now realized, had created a son. My son. The shards of glass on the floor were a perfect reflection of my own shattered state. I sank onto the sofa, the letter still clutched in my fist, the paper crinkling with the force of my grip. My mind was a maelstrom of images, a chaotic slideshow of the past 18 years, now viewed through a horrifying new lens. Every time I defended Chloe to a judgmental neighbor saying she was just lost, was I really defending myself without knowing it? Every time I'd patiently explained to Leo's teachers that his mother's absence was complicated, was I just weaving a more intricate lie? I thought of Mark. His face, once a blurry black and white photo in my memory, was now coming into sharp, vivid color. I remembered the curve of his smile, the way his eyes would darken when he was angry, the feel of his hand in mine. And I remembered that last night, the screaming match over his recklessness, my desire for stability. It had ended with us both in tears, exhausted and heartbroken. In a moment of weakness, of desperate, fading love, we had sought comfort in each other one last time. It was a goodbye. A painful, pathetic final goodbye. I had chalked up my missed period the next month to stress from the divorce. By the time I realized I was pregnant, Chloe was already in the throes of her worst downward spiral, and my mother had already begun to orchestrate her monstrous plan. The letter laid it all out. My mother had intercepted my mail and found the letter from the clinic confirming my pregnancy. She had cornered me, her face a mask of cold fury, but my memory of it was foggy, clouded. She had been so convincing, so forceful. She talked about my future, the shame, how Mark would never be a stable father. She'd used my own exhaustion and fear against me. Then she presented her solution. Chloe needed cash to pay off a dealer. I was emotionally fragile, on the verge of a breakdown. My mother, the master manipulator, had convinced me that letting Chloe claim the baby was the only way. She had framed it as an act of mercy for everyone involved. For Chloe, it was a way out of debt. For me, it was a clean slate. For the family, it was damage control. "You were unwell, Sarah," she had written in the letter, and the gaslighting was so potent it felt like I could taste it. Asterisk. "You weren't fit to make decisions. I did what was best." I had been so deep in a fog of heartbreak and shock that I'd let her. I remembered fragments now, signing papers I didn't read, my mother's cool hand on my forehead, the lie that she would arrange a private adoption. Instead, she had paid Chloe. She had sent my sister away for a few months. And when Chloe returned, gaunt and haunted, she was carrying my son, and the story was set. The lie was born, a lie I had helped tell, even if I hadn't understood its full scope. My mother had made me complicit in my own erasure. A wave of nausea washed over me. I stumbled to the kitchen and gripped the edge of the sink, splashing cold water on my face. I wasn't just an aunt. I was a mother who had been tricked into abandoning her own child. A mother who had then raised him under a pretense, loving him with a mother's heart but from an aunt's distance. What did this mean? Who was I? Who was Leo? The door to the study was ajar, and I saw the glow of his laptop from under his bedroom door down the hall. He was still awake, my son. My beautiful, funny, brilliant son, who was sleeping just a few feet away, was completely unaware that the entire foundation of his life was a lie I was now responsible for. My first instinct was primal. I had to tell him. I had to run to his room, wake him up, and scream the truth until my lungs gave out. Asterisk, I'm your mother. I'm your mother. Asterisk, but what would that do? It was the eve of his high school graduation, a day that was supposed to be one of the proudest moments of his life. How could I detonate this bomb and expect him to walk across the stage and accept his diploma tomorrow? How could I look him in the eye and tell him that I, his rock, his Aunt Sarah, had been part of such a monstrous deception? Even if I was a victim of it, I was also a participant. I had let it happen. And what about Mark? My blood ran cold. The letter had mentioned him by name. Asterisk. Mark was never to know. It would have tied you to him forever, and he was a dead end. Asterisk, he didn't know. He had a son who was about to turn 18. A son who had his eyes, his smile, his easygoing charm. Did he deserve to know? After all these years, the thought of seeing him again, of having to dredge up our painful past to deliver this life-altering news, was paralyzing. I paced the length of the living room, the broken glass crunching under my slippers. My mind was a battlefield. One part of me, the part that had been lied to, screamed for immediate, explosive truth. Let the chips fall where they may. Let the world burn. The other part, the mother part, the part that had spent 18 years protecting Leo from every possible harm, urged caution. This wasn't just my truth to tell. It was his. And dropping it on him like an anvil would be an act of cruelty, not love. My eyes fell on the graduation invitation still sitting on the kitchen counter. His school photo smiled up at me, so full of hope and promise. I had done that. I had raised that happy, well-adjusted young man. I had created a life of stability and love for him out of the ashes of Chloe's chaos and my mother's cruelty. The title, Aunt or Mother, didn't change the 18 years of lived experience. It didn't change the scraped knees I'd bandaged, the bedtime stories I'd read, the pride I felt swelling in my chest right now. But the secret was a poison, and it was already seeping into the foundations of our home. It sat between me and him, a silent, monstrous presence. I couldn't keep it. It would fester. It would eventually destroy us. But I couldn't just blurt it out either. There had to be a way, the right way. First, I needed to confirm it. The letter was damning, but it was still just words on a page from a woman who had lied her entire life. I needed something more. And there was only one other person who knew the whole story. Chloe was gone and my mother was dead. That left Mark. My fingers trembled as I picked up my laptop. I hadn't said his name aloud in almost 2 decades. Mark Peterson felt foreign on my tongue. I opened a web browser, my heart hammering against my ribs. I typed his name into the search bar, not even sure what I was looking for. Social media profile, an obituary. What came up was a link to a local construction company, Peterson and Sons Home Builders. The company logo was a stylized hammer and saw. I clicked on the About Us page, and there he was. Older, of course. His dark hair was shorter, flecked with gray at the temples. There were fine lines around his eyes, but it was him. The same confident set of his jaw, the same hint of a smirk on his lips. And next to him in the photo, a younger man who looked to be in his 20s with the same build and dark hair. His son, Mark, had remarried. He had another family. He had a whole other life. A life that had no idea about the son he'd left behind. My course of action became terrifyingly clear. I couldn't blow up Leo's life without a single piece of corroborating evidence. I had to see Mark. I had to look him in the eye and see if he knew. Or if he didn't, I had to be the one to tell him. Before I could talk to my son, I had to speak to his father. The next morning was surreal. I moved through the familiar rituals of our life in a haze. A ghost in my own home. I made pancakes. Leo, oblivious, declared the first burnt one a noble sacrifice, just like he always did. He chattered excitedly about graduation, about the party, about the summer road trip he was planning with his friends. Every word, every laugh was a small, sharp knife in my heart. I was watching my nephew, but I was seeing my son. The way he tilted his head when he was thinking, the way he drummed his fingers on the table. They were all tiny echoes of Mark I'd never noticed before. "You okay, Aunt Sarah?" he asked, pausing with a forkful of pancake halfway to his mouth. His brow was furrowed with concern. "You seem quiet." I forced a smile, my face feeling stiff and unnatural. "Just a little emotional," I said, my voice catching. "My baby boy is graduating. I'm allowed to be a mess." He laughed, a warm, easy sound that filled the kitchen. "You're not getting rid of me that easily. I'll still be around to annoy you all summer." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. His hand was so much bigger than mine now, strong and capable. "Thanks for everything, Aunt Sarah. For real. I wouldn't be here without you." Tears pricked my eyes, hot and treacherous. "I know, sweetie. I'm so proud of you." The love in that moment was so pure, so real, it almost made me doubt everything. Could a lie produce something this good? But beneath the love, the poison of the secret was already at work, making me feel like a fraud. I was accepting his gratitude under pretenses. After he left to meet his friends for a pre-graduation breakfast, I was alone in the silence of the house. The letter was where I'd left it, on the coffee table. A venomous snake coiled in the morning light. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the number I'd found for Peterson and Sons Home Builders. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. What would I even say? Asterisk, "Hi Mark, it's Sarah, your ex-wife from 20 years ago. Remember that one night? Well, congratulations, you have an 18-year-old son and his graduation is today." It was wild. But the alternative, doing nothing, was unthinkable. I took a deep, shuddering breath and dialed. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Peterson and Sons, how can I help you?" I'd like to speak to Mark Peterson, please," I stammered, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. "May I ask who's calling?" I froze. What could I say? Asterisk, "An old ghost? The mother of your secret child." Asterisk, "It's a personal matter," I finally managed. "Mr. Peterson is on a job site at the moment. Can I take a message?" Relief and disappointment warred within me. "Do you know when he'll be back?" "He should be in the office later this afternoon, around 3. Hey, thank you." Well, I'll come by then. I hung up before she could ask for my name. The hours between that phone call and 3 o'clock stretched into an eternity. I tried to distract myself with party preparations, arranging platters and hanging streamers in the backyard, but my hands shook and my mind was miles away. I was rehearsing the confrontation in my head, playing out a dozen different scenarios. In one, he was furious, accusing me of lying, of trying to extort him. In another, he broke down, consumed with guilt and regret. In another, he was cold, indifferent, telling me it was my problem, not his. None of them felt right. I had no idea who Mark was anymore. At 2:30, I looked at my reflection in the hall mirror. I looked pale, haunted. I changed my shirt 3 times, wanting to look composed, in control, not like a woman whose entire reality had just been upended. I finally settled on a simple blue blouse, hoping it would make me look calm and rational. The drive to his office was only 15 minutes, but it felt like a cross-country journey. The construction company was housed in a slick, modern building in a new industrial park, a world away from the tiny, run-down apartment we had once shared. This was a life of success, of stability, the life he had apparently built after he left me. A bitter resentment I hadn't felt in years began to bubble up inside me. He got this and I got a lie. I walked into the reception area, a bright, airy space with polished concrete floors and architectural drawings framed on the walls. The same woman from the phone smiled politely at me. "Can I help you? I'm here to see Mark Peterson," I said, my voice steadier this time. "He's expecting me." It was a small lie, but it gave me a sliver of confidence. "Of course, please have a seat. I'll let him know you're here." I sat on a sleek leather sofa, my hands clenched into fists in my lap. I could hear muffled voices from an office down the hall. A door opened and I listened to his voice. It was deeper now, richer, but unmistakably his. My breath caught in my throat, and then he was there, standing in the doorway. He looked from the receptionist to me, a polite, professional smile on his face. For a split second there was no recognition. I was just a client, a stranger. Then his eyes widened slightly. The smile faltered. "Sarah," he said, his voice a low whisper of disbelief. He walked toward me slowly, as if approaching a ghost. He looked good, better than good. He was confident, settled, radiating an aura of success. He wore a crisp button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong, tanned forearms. He was everything he'd promised he would become, the man I never believed he could be. "Mark," I said, my own voice barely audible. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly. What are you doing here?" he asked, his gaze searching my face. "It's been, God, almost 20 years. "I know," I said, my throat tight. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important. Can we talk somewhere private?" He hesitated for a moment, his eyes flickering back toward his office. Then he nodded. "Yeah, of course. My office." He led me down the hall and into a large corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A massive oak desk was covered in blueprints. On a shelf behind the desk was a series of framed photos. A smiling, blonde woman, his wife, the young man from the website photo, and a younger girl who looked about 14. His family, his real family. He closed the door behind us, the click of the latch echoing in the tense silence. He didn't sit down. He just stood there, leaning against his desk, his arms crossed over his chest. It was a defensive posture. "So," he said, his voice wary, "what's so important it brings you here after all this time?" I took a deep breath, and the prepared speeches, the carefully chosen words, all evaporated from my mind. All that was left was the raw, brutal truth. I reached into my purse and pulled out the letter. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. I didn't say a word. I just held it out to him. He looked from my face to the wrinkled piece of paper, a frown creasing his forehead. He took it from me, his fingers brushing against mine. The brief touch was like an electric shock, a jolt from a past I thought was dead and buried. He unfolded the letter and began to read. I watched his face, my entire being focused on his reaction. I saw the initial confusion, the furrow of his brow as he tried to make sense of my mother's script. Then I saw the exact moment the words registered. His face went slack. The color drained from his cheeks. His eyes darted back to the top of the page, rereading the lines desperately, as if hoping the words would change. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of horror and disbelief. "What is this?" he breathed, his voice ragged. "Is this some kind of sick joke?" "My mother died last week," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "She left this for me. I just found it last night." He sank into his expensive leather chair, the letter falling from his limp hand onto the desk. He stared at it, then at me. "Leo," he whispered, the name a ghost on his lips. Our Leo?" And in that one moment, with that one question, I knew. He hadn't known. He was as much a victim of this as I was. The anger I had been bracing for, the confrontation I had been rehearsing, It all dissolved, replaced by a strange, hollow sense of shared tragedy. We weren't ex-spouses anymore. We were two people staring into the wreckage of a lie that had defined both our lives. He had a son he never knew he had, and I had been raising him alone just a few miles away for 18 years. The silence in Mark's office was heavy, suffocating. He stared at the letter on his desk as if it were a venomous snake. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I remembered so vividly, one he always made when he was overwhelmed. For a long moment he said nothing. He just sat there, his face a mask of shock, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of his chair. "A son," he finally said, his voice a raw, broken whisper. He looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I have a son." All the bitterness I had carried for him, all the resentment for the life he had built while I struggled, vanished. In its place was a profound, aching pity. He had lost 18 years. He had missed everything. The first steps, the first words, the scraped knees, the soccer games, the bad haircuts, the teenage angst. He had been robbed of fatherhood. "He's a good kid, Mark," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "He's more than good. He's incredible. He's smart and funny and kind." I was defending Leo to his father, a man who didn't even know him. The absurdity of it was overwhelming. What does he look like?" he asked, his voice cracking. "He looks like you," I answered, and the simple truth of it hung in the air between us. "He has my eyes, but he has your smile." "The same one." Mark closed his eyes, a single tear escaping and tracing a path down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. The polished, successful businessman was gone. In his place was the boy I had once loved, shattered and vulnerable. "Why didn't you tell me, Sarah?" he asked, his voice pleading. "All these years, why?" The question was a spear to my heart. "I didn't know," I said, the words tasting like ash. "I swear to you I didn't know he was mine. My mother, she orchestrated everything. She told me I was unwell, that I couldn't handle it. She said she'd arranged a private adoption. She gave the baby to Chloe to pass off as her own. I thought I was raising my nephew. I grieved a child I thought I'd given away. I spent 18 years believing that." The horror on his face deepened. "Your mother, she did that?" "She did it to protect the family name," I said, quoting the letter with a sneer. "To protect me from the shame of being a divorced single mother. To protect herself from the scandal." He stood up and began pacing the room like a caged animal. "That woman, I never liked her. I always knew she was cold, but this is monstrous." He stopped and looked at me, his eyes full of a pain that mirrored my own. "And you've been carrying this all on your own for 18 years. Raising him, loving him, thinking he was your sister's. He was my world," I said. "It didn't matter what he was called. I loved him. I love him. That part was never a lie." He came back to the desk and leaned on it, his hands braced, his head bowed. "His graduation is today, isn't it?" I was stunned. "How did you know that?" "Your town's high school is small. I saw the announcement in the local paper a few weeks ago. The list of graduates. I saw the name Leo Miller, your sister's last name, and I don't know." I paused. "It was just a weird coincidence. I never imagined," his voice trailed off. He had seen his own son's name in print and had felt a pull he didn't understand. The universe had been whispering the secret all along. "The ceremony is at 6, I said quietly. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was almost 4. "Does he know?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "No. I only found out last night. I couldn't. Not right before his graduation. It's supposed to be his day. God, Sarah, what are we going to do?" He looked utterly lost, all his confidence, all his success stripped away, leaving him just a man who had just learned he was a father. "I don't know," I confessed. My first thought was to tell him. But how? How do you tell a boy that his entire life, his entire identity is built on a lie? That his aunt is his mother and his real mother was a stand-in? That his father is a stranger who has been living 15 minutes away his whole life? The weight of it settled on us both, a crushing, impossible burden. "I want to see him," Mark said, his voice thick with a desperate urgency. "I need to see him. Mark, we can't just show up at his graduation and drop this on him." I know that," he said, his frustration aimed at the situation, not at me. "I don't mean talk to him. I want to see him from a distance. I want to see my son graduate from high school." The request was so raw, so full of longing that I couldn't refuse. He had missed 18 years of milestones. He deserved to witness this one, even as a ghost in the crowd. "The stadium is open seating," I said. "Back of the bleachers. No one will notice you." He nodded, his eyes filled with a desperate gratitude. "Thank you." He paused, his gaze fixed on the photos of his other family. The blonde wife, the 2 other children, the perfect life. "My God," he whispered. "Laura, my kids. The next layer of devastation. This truth didn't just affect Leo and me and him. It would send shockwaves through his entire family. A family that had no idea this secret even existed. "We'll figure it out," I said, though I had no idea if that was true. "One step at a time. First we get through today. For Leo. We let him have his day. And then we have to tell him the truth." He nodded, his jaw tight. "Together," he said, looking me straight in the eye. "We tell him together." "Together," I agreed. I left his office feeling strangely lighter, as if a fraction of the burden had been lifted. I wasn't alone in this anymore. The drive home was a blur. I went on autopilot, picking up the cake, checking on the food, answering texts from family who were coming to the party. All the while, a part of my brain was screaming, Mark is coming. His father is coming to his graduation. I helped Leo get ready, straightening his tie and pinning on his honor cords. He was vibrating with excitement and nerves. He looked so handsome, so grown up in his dark blue gown. My heart ached with a love so fierce it was physically painful. As I looked at him, I saw it all so clearly now. The ghost of Mark in the set of his jaw, the shape of his hands. How had I never seen it? Or had I seen it and my subconscious had refused to acknowledge the impossible? "You ready for this?" I asked, smoothing down his collar one last time. "Born ready." He grinned, and it was Mark's grin, bright and full of life. "Let's go. Don't want to be late for my own graduation." As we walked out the door, I felt like I was leading him to his own execution. He was walking toward the proudest moment of his young life, and I knew that just around the corner, a truth was waiting that would tear it all down. The high school stadium was a sea of proud, beaming faces. The air buzzed with excitement, a symphony of cheerful chatter, laughter, and the rustle of graduation programs. I found our seats in the crowded bleachers, surrounded by other families clutching bouquets and oversized balloons. Leo, down on the field with his classmates, was a small figure in a vast ocean of blue caps and gowns. He kept looking up, scanning the crowd, and when he found me, he broke into a huge grin and wave. I waved back, my smile feeling like a brittle mask. My gaze instinctively drifted to the top of the bleachers, to the shadowy section in the back, and I saw him. Mark was standing alone, leaning against the railing, partially obscured by a pillar. He was wearing a simple dark jacket, his hands shoved into his pockets. He wasn't looking at me. His entire focus, his entire being was fixed on the field, on the son he was seeing for the first time as his own. The raw, undisguised longing on his face was a physical blow. He looked like a man starving, finally presented with a feast he wasn't allowed to touch. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second across the stadium, a silent acknowledgement of our shared, impossible situation. Then I looked away, my heart pounding. The ceremony began. The principal gave a speech, followed by the valedictorian. I clapped at all the right moments, my hands feeling disconnected from my body. My mind was a split screen. On one side, I was the proud aunt, beaming at Leo, my heart swelling every time he laughed with a friend or adjusted his cap. On the other side, I was a terrified mother, acutely aware of the father watching from the shadows. A ticking time bomb waiting to detonate our carefully constructed world. Then they began calling the names. Miller, Leo. The sound of his name, the wrong name, echoed across the field. I stood up, my hands trembling as I raised my phone to record the moment, just as I'd planned. But I wasn't just recording it for my memory anymore. I was recording it for Mark. Leo walked across the stage, his steps confident and sure. He shook the principal's hand, accepted his diploma, and for a fleeting moment he looked directly at the camera, directly at me, and gave that brilliant, heart-stopping smile. In that instant, nothing else mattered. Not the lies, not my mother, not Mark. All that existed was my son and the immense, overwhelming pride I felt for him. Tears streamed down my face, hot and unrestrained. These were tears of joy, of love, of 18 years of sacrifice and devotion culminating in this perfect moment. But they were also tears of grief for the truth that I would have to tell him, for the innocence I was about to shatter. After the ceremony, the field was in chaos. Graduates threw their caps in the air, a flurry of blue against the twilight sky. Families rushed onto the grass, hugging, crying, taking pictures. I pushed through the crowd, desperate to get to Leo. When I finally reached him, I wrapped my arms around him and held on tight, burying my face in his shoulder. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered, my voice choked with tears. So proud." "Whoa, easy there, Aunt Sarah." He laughed, hugging me back. "It's just a diploma, not a Nobel Prize." But it was so much more than that. It was proof that we had made it, that I had done a good job. Our small party was in full swing by the time we got home. A few of my cousins, a couple of my close friends from the library, and a handful of Leo's friends and their parents filled the backyard. The air was filled with the smell of barbecue and the sound of laughter. It was exactly the celebration I had envisioned, warm, loving, and centered entirely on Leo. He was the king of the evening, retelling stories from the ceremony, showing off his diploma, accepting congratulations and envelopes of cash with a charming mix of pride and humility. I played the part of the happy hostess, refilling drinks, passing out plates of food, but my eyes kept darting toward the street. I knew Mark wouldn't come to the house. We had agreed, but the knowledge that he was out there, somewhere in the same city, was a constant humming presence in the back of my mind. Later in the evening, as things started to wind down, I was clearing some plates when my cousin Donna cornered me by the drinks table. Donna had always been the family historian, the one with the sharp memory and the sharper tongue. "He's the spitting image of his father, you know," she said conversationally, nodding toward Leo, who was laughing with his friends by the fire pit. My blood ran cold. "What? Oh, I know Chloe never liked to talk about him," she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "But I met him once, briefly, before she got pregnant. His name was Mark, right? Dark hair, that same cocky grin. Leo is his clone. It's a shame he never stuck around." I stared at her, my mouth dry. Of course someone else had seen it. The resemblance wasn't just in my head. It was real. Tangible. It was a secret that had been hiding in plain sight for years, and I had just been too close, too deep in the lie to see it. "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Mark." The last of the guests left around 11. Leo helped me clean up, and we stood in the kitchen together, surrounded by the happy debris of the party. He was exhausted but glowing. "Best day ever," he said, leaning against the counter and stifling a yawn. "It was pretty great," I agreed, my heart aching. The moment had come. There would never be a right time. But the silence was becoming a physical weight. I couldn't carry it for another day. Postponing it now felt like a different kind of lie. "Leo," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "Can we sit down for a minute? There's something I need to talk to you about." The smile on his face faded, replaced by a look of concern. He saw the gravity in my eyes. "Yeah, sure. Is everything okay?" We sat down on the sofa in the living room, the same sofa where we'd had 1,000 movie nights. But tonight it felt like a stranger's house. I didn't know where to start. My carefully prepared words had deserted me again. "What I'm about to tell you," I started, my voice shaking, "is going to be very difficult to hear, and I need you to know before I say anything else, that I love you more than anything in this world. Nothing will ever change that." His eyes were wide, his face pale. "Aunt Sarah, you're scaring me." I took a deep breath, and then I just told him. I started with my mother's letter. I told him about Chloe, about my mother's plan, about my own confusion and grief at the time. I left Mark out of it for now. That was another bomb for another moment. First, he had to process this. I laid the truth out, piece by painful piece. As I spoke, his face went from confusion to disbelief and finally to a quiet, chilling stillness. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just sat there, his expression unreadable, his body rigid. When I finished, the silence was deafening. He just stared at the floor, his hands clenched in his lap. "So," he said, his voice flat and empty, "my whole life is a lie." "No, Leo, not your life," I pleaded, reaching for his hand, but he pulled it away. "The story of how you got here was a lie, but you are real. Our life together, our love for each other, that's real. That's the truest thing I know." He finally looked up at me, and his eyes, my eyes, were filled with a pain and betrayal so deep it stole my breath. "You're my mother?" he asked, the word sounding alien and sharp. "Yes," I whispered. He stood up, his movements stiff and jerky. "And you knew? All this time you've known?" "No," I cried, standing up to face him. "Leo, please, you have to believe me. I didn't know. I swear to you. I thought I was your aunt. I just found out. I just found this all out 2 nights ago." He just shook his head, a slow, deliberate movement. He didn't believe me. Or he couldn't. The betrayal was too big, too absolute. He looked at me as if I were a stranger. The warmth, the love, the 18 years of trust we had built, it had all vanished from his eyes. "I need some air," he said, his voice cold and distant. He walked to the front door, grabbed his car keys from the bowl on the table, and walked out without another word, without a backward glance. I stood there, frozen, listening to the sound of his car starting, the squeal of the tires as he pulled away too fast. And then I collapsed onto the sofa and let out a sob, a raw, guttural sound of pure agony. I had finally told the truth, and I had just lost my son. The silence that followed the slam of the front door was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a physical presence, a heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered the happy echoes of the party. The house, which just an hour ago had been filled with light and laughter, now felt like a tomb. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, my body numb, my mind replaying his face, the cold, dead look in his eyes. He had looked right through me, the boy I had tucked into bed, the the boy whose fevers I had soothed with cool cloths on his forehead, the boy who had once called me his everything, had looked at me as if I were nothing. For an hour I did nothing. I just sat on the sofa in the dark, surrounded by the remnants of the celebration. A deflated balloon, a half-eaten piece of cake, a stack of graduation cards. Each object was a cruel reminder of the joy that had been stolen. My phone lay on the coffee table, a dark, silent rectangle. I was terrified to pick it up, terrified of the confirmation that he wouldn't answer. But the fear for his safety began to eclipse the pain of his rejection. He had driven off in anger, his mind in turmoil. My fingers trembled as I finally picked up the phone and called him. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then went to voicemail. His voice, young and cheerful, filled the silence. Asterisk, hey, you've reached Leo. Leave a message. Asterisk, the casual greeting was a gut punch. I called again, voicemail, and again, voicemail. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw its way up my throat. Where would he go? He had no family but me. His friends, maybe. I sent a frantic text. Asterisk, Leo, please just let me know you're safe. I love you. Asterisk, the message delivered, but the space beneath it remained terrifyingly blank. No reply. I was alone, utterly and completely alone with this disaster. And then I remembered. I wasn't. There was one other person on this earth who had as much at stake as I did. The one person whose world had been upended just as surely as mine. I found Mark's number in my recent calls. My thumb hovered over the screen. It felt like a monumental betrayal of Leo to involve him. But I was drowning and he was the only other person in the water. I pressed the call button. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight with anxiety. Sarah? Is everything okay? Did you tell him? He's gone. I choked out, the words breaking apart into sobs. I told him, Mark, and he left. He won't answer his phone. He's gone. I heard him exhale sharply. There was a pause, and in that silence I listened to the rustle of fabric, the jingle of keys. He was moving, acting. Oh, Sarah, breathe, he said, his voice dropping into a calm, commanding tone. It was the voice of a man used to solving problems. Where would he go? Does he have a best friend? A girlfriend? His best friend, Sam. I managed. They've been inseparable since kindergarten. He practically lives at their house. Hey, what's the family's name? Reynolds. Bill and Karen Reynolds. They live over on Maple Street. I'm on my way, he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. I'll pick you up in 10 minutes. We'll go over there together. He hung up, and for the first time in hours, a tiny sliver of control pierced through my panic. He had said we. True to his word, a sleek, dark truck pulled up to my curb exactly 10 minutes later. I walked out of my house and got into the passenger seat, a place I hadn't occupied in 20 years. The interior smelled of leather and sawdust, a distinctly masculine scent. It was the smell of his life, the one he had built without me. He didn't say much as we drove, just glanced over at me, his face etched with worry. Are you okay? I just shook my head, unable to speak. As we turned onto Maple Street, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. Asterisk, this is Karen Reynolds, Sarah. Leo is here. He's safe, but he's very, very upset. He told me something I'm struggling to understand. Maybe you should come over. The secret was out. It had breached the walls of my home and was now spreading. A quiet contagion. The shame was suffocating. Karen and I had served on the PTA together for years. We'd chaperoned school dances and organized fundraisers. Now she was looking at me through new eyes. The eyes of someone who had just learned her friend was living a lie. When we pulled up to the Reynolds house, all the lights were on. Mark parked the truck and turned to me, his expression grim. Ready? No, I whispered. We walked up the path together, 2 strangers bound by a secret and a son. Karen opened the door before we even knocked. She was a kind woman with warm eyes, but tonight they were filled with a mixture of pity and confusion. Sarah, she said softly. Her eyes flickered to Mark, standing beside me, and a look of dawning comprehension crossed her face. She saw the resemblance. Everyone would see it now. He's in the backyard. He doesn't want to talk. We walked through her immaculate house, our footsteps echoing in the awkward silence. She gestured toward the sliding glass door. Through the glass, I could see Leo sitting on the edge of their patio, his head in his hands, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Mark put a hand on my arm, a brief, steadying touch. Let me go first, he said quietly. I was about to argue, to insist that I be the one, but I stopped. What right did I have? I was the source of his pain. Maybe he needed a different voice. I nodded numbly. Mark slid the door open and stepped out into the cool night air. I watched from the doorway, my heart in my throat. Leo, Mark said. His voice was gentle, hesitant. Leo didn't look up. Go away, he said, his voice muffled. I'm not going to do that, Mark said, taking a few steps closer. My name is Mark. I think we need to talk. At the sound of his name, Leo slowly lifted his head. He looked at the strange man standing on his friend's patio. He stared, his eyes narrowed, taking in the face of the man who was, until a few hours ago, a complete unknown. I saw the moment of recognition, the moment his brain connected the dots. He saw his own features reflected in this stranger's face. The betrayal on his face morphed into a new, more complex expression, dawning horror. He shot to his feet, his eyes darting from Mark to me standing in the doorway. He looked at us, standing there together, the liar and the stranger, his parents. "So that's him," he said, his voice dripping with a cold, corrosive anger I had never heard from him before. He wasn't yelling. It was worse. It was a quiet, controlled fury that was far more terrifying. "This is the other half of the lie." He looked at me, his eyes full of accusation. "You didn't just lie to me about who you are. You lied to me about who I am." Then he turned his gaze back to Mark, a man he should have known his entire life. "I don't know you," he said, the words like stones. "And I don't know you," he added, his eyes landing on me with a final, devastating blow. "I don't know either of you." He turned and walked to the far end of the yard, putting as much distance between us as he could, leaving Mark and me standing in the wreckage, two criminals in the eyes of our son. The days that followed were the bleakest of my life. Leo stayed with the Reynolds family. Karen was a saint, a buffer between my frantic grief and Leo's walled-off silence. She would text me brief, sterile updates. He ate something today. He went for a run. He's sleeping. Each message was a tiny, precious crumb of information, but it did nothing to fill the gaping hole in my home and my heart. The house was a mausoleum. His bedroom door, which had always been open, was now closed, and I couldn't bring myself to walk past it. Every corner held a memory, and the lie now tainted every memory. I didn't go to work. I called my supervisor and told her there was a family emergency, a phrase that felt both laughably inadequate and perfectly accurate. I spent my days pacing the quiet rooms, picking up my phone to call him, then setting it back down. He needed space. I had to give him space, but the silence was eating me alive. Mark called me every day. He didn't push, he didn't demand. He just checked in. "Any news?" he'd ask, his voice heavy. "How are you holding up?" Strangely and unexpectedly, he became my lifeline. He was the only person who understood the exact shape of my grief because he was living it too. We were partners in this unwanted, tragic club. A week after the graduation, he called and said, "We need a plan, Sarah. We can't just wait for him to come around. We have to show him we're serious, that we're not going to just disappear." "What kind of plan, Mark?" He won't even look at me. "I've been doing some thinking," he said, "and some research. There are family therapists who specialize in this kind of thing. Non-traditional families, discovery of parentage. It's a thing." My first reaction was to recoil. The idea of airing our family's bizarre, shameful secret to a stranger felt mortifying. But what was the alternative? To let Leo drift away from us forever? "Do you really think he'd go?" I asked. "I don't know," Mark admitted, "but we have to ask. We have to show him we're willing to do the work. We have to be the adults." He was right. We had been passive players in a story my mother wrote. Now, for the first time, we had to be the authors of the next chapter. Mark did the legwork. He found a therapist with excellent credentials, Dr. Evans. He booked a preliminary appointment for just the two of us. I agreed, feeling a flicker of something that might have been hope. The therapist's office was a neutral space, clean and calm, with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. It felt miles away from the emotional war zone of my life. Dr. Evans was a warm, intelligent woman in her 50s, with kind eyes that held no judgment. We told her everything, the whole sordid, complicated story, from my impulsive marriage to Mark, to my mother's machinations, to the 18 years of loving deception, to the explosive reveal. I cried. Mark, to my surprise, choked up when he described seeing Leo on the graduation stage for the first time. We were two broken people laying the shattered pieces of our lives at a stranger's feet. Dr. Evans listened patiently, nodding, taking notes. When we were done, an exhausted silence filled the room. "This is a trauma," she said simply, "for all three of you. Leo's entire sense of self has been fractured. His trust in the world, and specifically in you, Sarah, has been broken. And you both are grieving 18 lost years." She gave us strategies. She told us to stop pushing, to give him control. She suggested we write him letters. Not demanding anything, but simply expressing our love, our regret, and our willingness to do whatever it took to begin to heal. That night, I wrote my letter. I poured my entire heart onto the page. I told him how sorry I was, not just for the lie, but for the pain it had caused him. I told him that being his parent, under any title, had been the most incredible honor of my life. I told him that I would wait for as long as it took. Mark wrote one too. He dropped it in my mailbox the next day for me to deliver. I didn't read it, but I could feel its weight in my hands. the weight of 18 years of unsaid words. I drove to the Reynolds house and gave the letters to Karen, asking her to please give them to Leo when the time was right. 2 more days of silence passed, and then on a Thursday afternoon my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered, my heart pounding. Hello, it's Leo. His voice was quiet, fragile. I got your letters. I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly weak. Leo. Oh, honey, I read what you said about therapy. There was a long pause. I'll go once to hear what you both have to say, but that's it. I'm not promising anything. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't a reunion, but it was a start. It was a door cracked open just an inch. Okay, I whispered, tears of relief streaming down my face. Leo, thank you. The first session with all 3 of us was the most challenging hour of my life. Leo sat in a chair as far away from Mark and me as possible. He didn't look at us. He just stared at his hands, his body language a fortress of anger and pain. Dr. Evans guided the conversation gently. She asked Leo to describe how he felt. I feel like a science experiment, he said, his voice low and bitter. Like something that was created and then lied about. I don't know who I am. I look in the mirror and I don't know whose face I'm looking at. My name isn't even my name. Mark spoke then, his voice thick with emotion. Your name is Leo, he said. That's who you are. We can figure out the last name later. But you are Leo. He leaned forward, his hands clasped. I know I'm a stranger to you, and I can never get back the years I missed. I will regret that for the rest of my life. But I am your father. And I would like a chance, no matter how small, to get to know my son. I told Leo about the joy he had brought me, about pancake Saturdays and learning to ride a bike. I told him that none of that was a lie. I loved you with a mother's heart, Leo. I just didn't know I had the right to call it that. He didn't respond much during the session. He just listened. But when the hour was up and Dr. Evans asked if he would be willing to come back, he hesitated for a long moment. Then he gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. We went back week after week. The progress was glacial. Some sessions were filled with angry silence. In others, Leo would lash out, his pain and confusion pouring out of him. We let him. We absorbed it. We apologized again and again. Mark and I learned to be a team, a united front of parental love and regret. We presented him with the truth no matter how ugly. We answered his questions about our whirlwind marriage, the divorce, my mother and Chloe. Slowly things began to thaw. It started with small things. Leo started answering my texts. He agreed to meet Mark for coffee, just the 2 of them. Mark told me later that they mostly sat in silence, but it was a start. One Saturday morning, about 2 months after the graduation, I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring into a cold cup of tea when I heard a key in the front door. Leo walked in. He looked thin and tired, but he was home. He didn't say anything. He just walked over to the kitchen counter, pulled out the griddle from the cabinet and set it on the stove. He looked at me, his eyes still wary, still hurt, but with a flicker of the old warmth I had missed so desperately. I'm kind of hungry, he said quietly. Can we make some pancakes? My breath hitched. It wasn't a declaration of forgiveness. It wasn't a promise that everything would be okay. It was just a question. A simple, typical question. It was a single step back toward the life we had lost. I stood up and for the first time in months, a genuine smile touched my lips. Of course, I said, my voice thick. Let me get the flour. I'll probably burn the first one. He almost smiled. A sacrifice to the pancake gods, he said. And in that small shared ritual, in the familiar scent of batter and melting butter, I felt the first true glimmer of hope. The road ahead was long and our family would never be the same. It would be something new, something more complicated, something we would have to build together, piece by painful piece. But for the first time I believed it was possible. We were finally starting to heal. It's been a year since that first fragile pancake breakfast. Our new life isn't a perfect, seamless repair of the old one. It's more like kintsugi, the Japanese art of mending broken pottery with gold. The cracks are still visible. They are part of our history now, but they are filled with something strong and precious. They are filled with honesty. Our family looks different now. It's messy and not very easy. Mark is a constant presence. He and Leo are building something new step by careful step. They go to baseball games, work on Mark's old truck together, and have long, quiet talks I am not a part of. Mark and I are not in love, and we never will be again. But we have found a different kind of partnership, one forged in our shared, unconditional love for our son. We are parents finally together. And Leo, he is finding his way. Some days are good. He'll call me Mom. So naturally it makes my heart sing. Other days, a shadow passes over his face and I know he's thinking about the years we lost, about the lie he grew up in. He's navigating 2 histories, and I know the scars of my mother's deception will always be a part of him. But the coldness is gone. replaced by a deep, quiet strength I admire more than I can say. I've learned that motherhood isn't about biology or a name or a story you tell the world. It's about showing up. It's in the bandaging of a scraped knee, the cheering from the sidelines, the steadying hand on a bicycle, and the courage to tell a terrible truth, even if it breaks your own heart. My mother built a wall of lies to protect a name, but she imprisoned us all behind it. The love was always real, but it could only truly breathe in the light of truth. A family can be built on love, but as I now know, it can also be built on a lie. My question for you is this: if you discovered a lie was the foundation holding your world together, would you have the courage to tell the truth, knowing it might break everything apart? I read all of your comments and I find so much strength in your stories and your wisdom. Please share your thoughts below. And if you find a home in these stories, I hope you'll consider subscribing and supporting the channel so we can continue to share them.